Welcome to Terror Tales. Gather around the campfire. Join our circle as we share true, terrifying stories from the shadows of the real world. Subscribe and become part of the camp. The night is long, and you're not alone. My name is Alex. I was 25 years old, living in a first-floor apartment in a neighborhood just on the outskirts of downtown Seattle, Washington. The area was a mix of quiet residential streets and slowly gentrifying commercial blocks, with old brick buildings standing next to new condominiums. The night it happened was in mid-October, a cool, clear Tuesday around 1:30 a.m. I had been at a friend's apartment playing cards and decided to walk home. The distance was about a mile, a road I had taken dozens of times, down Blanchard Street, past the closed art supply store and the 24-hour diner that was always empty, then cutting through a small park before reaching my street. The first part of the walk was uneventful. The city was quiet, the usual hum of daytime traffic replaced by the distant, occasional siren and the sound of my own footsteps echoing slightly against the brick and concrete canyon of the buildings. The streetlights cast long, overlapping pools of orange light, creating deep, dark shadows in the doorways and alleys between them. I remember feeling perfectly calm, my hands in my jacket pockets, just counting down the blocks until I could be home. It was when I passed the diner, its neon OPEM sign flickering, that I first saw him. He was standing under a streetlight on the opposite side of the street, about half a block ahead of me. At first, I thought he was just a man waiting for someone, but he was perfectly still, and he was dressed in a way that was immediately unsettling given the hour and the context. A formal, somewhat old-fashioned suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie. It looked like something from a 1950s business catalog. The suit was a dark, charcoal gray, and it seemed too large for his thin, wiry frame. As I got closer, I could see his face, and he was smiling, not a normal smile, not a happy or friendly one. It was a wide, exaggerated grin, stretching his lips taut over his teeth, a rictus of pure, unblinking joy that did not reach his eyes. His eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, as if he were looking at something fascinating in the middle distance. He remained utterly motionless, a statue planted under the street lamp. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My pace slowed. Every instinct told me to cross the street, to put distance between us. I did, moving to the other side, my eyes locked on him. As I drew parallel to him, his head began to turn. It wasn't a smooth, human motion. It was a slow, mechanical pivot, like a clockwork doll, until his smiling face and those wide, unblinking eyes were directed straight at me. The smile never faltered. He didn't say a word. I quickened my pace, my heart starting to hammer in my chest. I dared a glance back over my shoulder after about 20 feet. He was gone from under the streetlight. A wave of relief washed over me, thinking he had just been a strange drunk and had moved on. Then I saw him again. He was now standing on my side of the street, closer to me than before, partially obscured in the shadow of a bus stop shelter. But I could still see the white gleam of that impossible smile. I stopped walking. He stopped moving. We stood there for what felt like a full minute, locked in a silent standoff. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. I decided to test it. I took a deliberate step backward. The moment I did, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. His movements were wrong. They were stiff, yet fluid in a way that suggested his joints operated on a different principle. He wasn't walking so much as gliding, his feet seeming to whisper across the pavement. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. I turned and started walking quickly, decisively, toward my apartment, which was now about 3 blocks away. I could hear his footsteps behind me, a light, scraping sound that kept perfect time with my own. I didn't want to run. some part of my brain believing that running would trigger a chase. I looked back. He was there, about 30 feet behind me. His arms held slightly out from his sides, his body tilted forward, that smile still carved onto his face. His walk had become a bizarre, jaunty prance, a silent, gleeful parody of a dance. I broke into a run. The moment I did, the scraping footsteps behind me turned into a rapid, skittering sound. I sprinted down Blanchard, my lungs burning, not daring to look back. I could hear him. He was gaining. His pace was unnaturally fast. I risked one glance. He was no longer running. He was performing a series of wild, spinning leaps and pirouettes, his limbs flailing in a chaotic, jerking ballet, all while maintaining that fixed, horrifying smile and closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. It was the sight of that joyful, unhinged dance in the middle of the silent night that shattered my last vestige of calm. I fumbled for my keys as I reached my building's outer security door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely get the key into the lock. I could hear the skittering footsteps right behind me. I finally shoved the door open, slammed it shut, and engaged the deadbolt. I turned around, pressing my back against the cool wood, breathing in ragged, sobbing gasps. Through the frosted glass of the door window, I saw a shadow appear. He was on the other side. He didn't pound on the door. He didn't try the handle. Instead, he slowly leaned forward until his face was pressed against the glass. The exterior light distorted his features, but I could still see it clearly. The same wide, ecstatic smile. He stood there, motionless once more, for what felt like an eternity, just smiling into my apartment building. I finally gathered the courage to run to my actual apartment, lock myself inside, and call the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. They found no one. They searched the area and found no trace of the man in the suit. They took my statement with skeptical professionalism. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, staring at my own locked door, expecting at any moment to see a shadow fall across the peephole or to hear a faint, scraping sound from the hallway. The true terror of that night did not end with the morning sun. It was the lingering, unshakable feeling that I had not been pursued by a man with malicious intent. The feeling was far worse. I had been approached by something that operated on a logic I could not comprehend. Something that found my fear to be a source of immense, silent delight. The smiling man was not a predator in the ordinary sense. He was an enthusiast, a collector of dread, and on that cool October night in Seattle, I had been his chosen exhibit. The memory of his joyful, dancing pursuit in the empty streets is a cold stone in my stomach, a permanent reminder that the world contains pockets of pure, unfathomable strangeness that can step out of the shadows at any time, wearing a smile that never, ever reaches its eyes. My name is Daniel. For 6 years, I worked as a search and rescue officer for a federal agency in a vast, mountainous national forest in the Pacific Northwest. The name of the forest is best left undisclosed. Those who know the stories will recognize it. My job was not the romanticized version you see on television. It was grueling, often tragic work, involving long treks through unforgiving terrain to find lost hikers, injured climbers, and sometimes to recover bodies. But interspersed with these routine tragedies were things that defied any protocol, any logical training, and any rational explanation. We had a name for these inexplicable files. We called them anomalies. The most common and most persistently unnerving of these anomalies were the stairs. I first encountered them on a search for a missing family in the late summer of 2007. We were about 3 miles from the nearest trail in a dense, old-growth section of the forest that saw very little human traffic. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. We were conducting a grid search, our eyes scanning the ground for any sign. A footprint, a scrap of clothing, anything. That's when I saw it, a single, freestanding staircase, made of weathered, dark wood, rising about 15 feet into the air before terminating in nothing. It was perfectly constructed, with ornate, hand-turned balusters and a solid-looking handrail. It was just there, in the middle of the wilderness. There was no house, no foundation, no cellar hole, nothing. Just a staircase ascending into the canopy of the fir trees. I radioed it in. My dispatcher's response was immediate and firm. Mark the location on your GPS. Do not approach. Do not touch. Do not climb. Acknowledge. The tone was one of rehearsed routine. When I returned to the ranger station, my supervisor pulled me aside. He was a grizzled man in his 50s, a veteran of the forest. He didn't smile. He said, "You saw one of them. You'll see more. Remember the rules. Don't go near them. Don't touch them. And for God's sake, don't ever climb them." Over the years, I saw dozens. They were never the same. Some were simple, rustic log constructions. Others were elaborate, like something from a Victorian mansion, with carpeting that was somehow pristine despite being exposed to the elements. I once found a spiral staircase made of wrought iron, coiled like a metal snake amidst the pine trees. They were always clean, free of moss, lichen, and insect nests, as if the forest itself refused to reclaim them. The rules about the stairs were not arbitrary superstition. They were born from grim experience. In the archives, I was given access to the redacted files. Case 83-041, a hiker found dead at the base of one such staircase. His body contorted into a position that was physiologically impossible, every bone broken, as if he had fallen from a great height, though the staircase was only 12 feet tall. Case 91-102, and a group of college students on a camping trip. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, was found by her friends attempting to climb a staircase they'd discovered. They said she was speaking to someone at the top, someone they couldn't see. When they tried to pull her back, she fought them with inhuman strength. She was later found wandering, miles from the site, dehydrated and psychotic. She kept repeating, "They showed me the rooms," but the doors wouldn't open. She was institutionalized. The most harrowing search of my career involved the stairs. It was for a 7-year-old boy named Kevin, who had wandered away from his family's campsite. We had K-9 units, helicopters with thermal imaging, hundreds of volunteers. For 2 days, we found nothing. On the third day, I was leading a team through a steep, boulder-strewn ravine, a place so difficult to access it wasn't on our initial search map. And there it was, a staircase. This one was different. It was made of pale, almost white stone, and it seemed newer than the others. The air around it was dead silent. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of the wind. Then, we heard a faint giggle. It came from the top of the staircase. We shone our lights up, but the beams seemed to be swallowed by a peculiar darkness that clung to the summit. The giggle came again, a child's laugh, but it was wrong. It was hollow, like an imitation. My partner, a rookie named Jess, started to call out, "Kevin, are you up there?" I grabbed her arm and silenced her. The rule was absolute no interaction. We set up a perimeter. As we did, I noticed something on the steps. Small, child-sized footprints in the dust, leading down the stairs. They started a few steps from the top, as if the child had simply materialized there. We followed the tracks. They led us about 50 yards away, to a small hollow under the roots of a massive cedar tree. Kevin was there, curled up and asleep. He was physically unharmed. When we woke him, he was confused but coherent. He said he had been following a funny man who smelled like old leaves and who promised to show him a castle. He described the staircase, but said the funny man led him up it, and at the top was a long hallway with many doors. He said he got scared because he could hear people crying behind the doors. The next thing he remembered was us waking him up. We brought Kevin back to his parents. The case was closed as a miracle, but the official report made no mention of the staircase, the funny man, or the hallway of doors. It was filed away as an anomaly. I left search and rescue a year later. The weight of the things I couldn't explain became too heavy. The ending of this story is not a resolution, but a warning. The wilderness is old, and it contains things that were never meant to be understood by people. The stairs are the most visible part of it. They are not structures. They are invitations. Or perhaps they are traps. They exist in places where the map of the world has folded over on itself, creating a scene. What lies on the other side is not a place you can return from intact. The true terror is the knowledge that these things are just there, standing silent and patient in the deep woods, waiting for someone who doesn't know the rules to come along. And every year, more people disappear in the national forests. We never found most of them. I sometimes lie awake at night and wonder how many of them simply found a staircase on a quiet day and, curious, decided to see where it led. My name is Sarah. This happened in 1994, when I was 8 years old, living in a 2-story colonial house on a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac in Naperville, Illinois. The house was my childhood home, a place of birthday parties and backyard barbecues, with pale yellow siding and a wide, welcoming porch. My father, Mark, was an architect, and my mother, Lisa, was a nurse who often worked the evening shift at Edward Hospital. Our family was rounded out by our golden retriever, Buddy, and my older brother, Michael, who was 12 at the time and already retreating into the sullen fortress of adolescence. The first irregularity was small, almost dismissible. It was a sound, a faint, rhythmic creaking that would sometimes echo down the hallway from my parents' room late at night. It wasn't the sound of the house settling. It was the specific, unmistakable sound of someone rocking in the old wooden rocking chair that sat in the corner of their bedroom. A chair that had been my grandmother's. I asked my mom about it one morning. She said she sometimes rocked there to read before bed, but the times I heard it were always well past midnight, long after her shift ended or she had gone to sleep. Then Michael started sleepwalking. He'd never done it before. We'd find him standing motionless in the hallway or at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide open but utterly vacant. When we guided him back to bed, he'd mumble nonsense. One phrase, however, was clear and was repeated with chilling consistency. "The other mom is in the chair." We chalked it up to stress from school or a weird dream phase. The incidents escalated. I began to have a recurring dream. In it, I would wake up in my bed, the room lit by the faint green glow of my digital clock, which always read 3:18 a.m. The door to my room would be open, and standing in the hallway would be a woman. She had my mother's face, her hair, and was even wearing the same floral print nightgown my mother owned. But the proportions were subtly wrong. Her arms were a little too long. Her smile was a little too wide, showing a few too many teeth, and her eyes held a flat, patient stillness that my lively, warm-hearted mother never possessed. She would just stand there, rocking back and forth on her heels, mimicking the motion of the rocking chair, and smile that stretched, placid smile. I would wake up screaming. My mother would rush in, holding me, assuring me it was just a nightmare. But the feeling was too vivid, too real. The smell that lingered in the hallway after these dreams was not my mother's perfume, but a faint, dusty odor like old linen and dried flowers. One night, the dream broke its pattern. I woke at 3:18 a.m. The figure was there, but she wasn't in the hallway. She was standing beside my bed, leaning over me, her long, fingered hand resting on my comforter. Her smile was wider than ever. "I'm your other mother," she whispered, her voice a perfect mimic of my mom's, but layered with a faint, papery rustle. "I love you just as much," I screamed myself hoarse. The next day, I refused to be alone. I clung to my mother. That evening, after my real mom had left for her night shift, my dad was trying to calm me down in the living room. Michael was sitting silently, staring at the blank television screen. From upstairs, we heard it clearly, the distinct, slow, back and forth creak, creak, creak of the rocking chair. My father's face went pale. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and told us to stay put. He marched upstairs, his footsteps firm on the hardwood. The rocking stopped the moment he reached the top step. Buddy, who usually followed my dad everywhere, whined and pressed himself against my legs, his tail between his legs. We heard my dad's bedroom door open. There was a long silence. Then he came back down, his face a mask of forced calm. "Nothing there, kiddo," he said, his voice tight. The wind must have been blowing through the window. But the window in his room had been closed. I knew it. He knew it. The climax happened a week later. My mother was home, asleep in her bed after a long shift. My father was asleep beside her. Michael and I were in our respective rooms. I was jerked awake not by a dream, but by a sound. It was the sound of soft humming. It was the lullaby my mother always sang to me. "You are my sunshine." But the cadence was off, the notes slightly dragged. It was coming from the hallway. I crept out of bed and peered through my crack in the door. She was there, the other mother. She was walking slowly past my door, humming, rocking an invisible child in her arms. She was more defined now, more solid than in my dreams. The floral pattern on her nightgown seemed to shift and writhe in the dim light. She paused at Michael's door, and her head rotated towards it on a neck that seemed too fluid. She then continued down the hall towards my parents' room. Terrified, I did what I knew I shouldn't. I followed. I crouched at the end of the hallway, watching as she stopped at the foot of my parents' bed. My real mother was sleeping on her side. The other mother stood there staring at her. Then she began to change. Her form seemed to blur and ripple. Her height adjusted. Her hair shifted its style to perfectly match my sleeping mother's messy bed hair. She was refining her copy. Just then, my father snorted in his sleep and rolled over. The other mother's head snapped towards him. Her wide, smiling face was now a perfect duplicate of my mother's, but it was frozen in that expression, a waxwork likeness of sleep. She took a silent step closer to the bed, her long arm beginning to reach out. I couldn't stay silent. I let out a small, choked whimper. The thing turned its head. Its eyes, my mother's eyes, locked onto mine. The smile never wavered, but the eyes glittered with something ancient and cold. It was not anger. It was recognition. It knew I could see it for what it was. It took a step towards me, and then another, its movement completely silent. I was frozen, pinned in place by that gaze. It leaned down until its face was inches from mine. I could smell the dust and dried flowers. "Shh," it whispered with my mother's mouth. "Poor little secret." At that moment, Buddy, who had been hiding, burst from my room with a ferocious bark he'd never used before. He planted himself between me and the thing, growling, the fur on his back standing straight up. The thing straightened up, its head tilting as it looked at the dog. The smile finally faded, replaced by a look of mild, distant curiosity, as if examining an interesting insect. Then, it simply turned and walked back into my parents' bedroom. Not towards the door, but towards the corner where the rocking chair sat. It sat down in the chair, and as it did, its form seemed to dissolve, unraveling like smoke in the darkness, until there was nothing left but the empty chair. The rocking started again on its own for a few moments before ceasing forever. We never saw it again. But the ending is not a happy one. The terror did not leave, it fossilized. My brother and I never spoke of it directly, but it created a chasm in our family, a shared secret too awful to acknowledge. My parents divorced a few years later. The unspoken strain of that night, the thing they couldn't explain, festered beneath the surface of our perfect suburban life. The true horror of the third parent was not the entity itself, but the profound, silent damage it inflicted. It violated the most fundamental sanctuary a child has, the certainty of a parent's love and identity. It left me with a permanent, low-grade paranoia, a fear of the dark that never truly faded. To this day, if I wake in the night and see a shape in the doorway, my heart doesn't race because I think it's a monster. My heart races because for a single, paralyzing second, I'm afraid it's her. I'm afraid it's my mother, standing there with a smile that's a little too wide, and eyes that are not her own, waiting to tell me once again that she loves me just as much. My name is Frank. For 20 years, I drove an 18-wheeler across the United States, hauling everything from consumer goods to industrial machinery. My route often took me through the vast, empty stretches of the Southwest. Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. I knew every truck stop, every way station, every forgotten two-lane highway that cut through the desert like a scar. By 2015, I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. I was wrong. It began on a Tuesday in late October. I was driving a load from Phoenix to Albuquerque on a secondary state route, a road I'd taken a dozen times to avoid the interstate traffic. It was a moonless night, the kind of dark you only get in the desert, where the sky is a vast, black dome and the only light comes from your own headlights painting the cracked asphalt. The landscape was flat and featureless, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional skeletal saguaro cactus. The first sign was the radio. The classic rock station I'd been listening to from Phoenix began to break up, dissolving into a wave of static. Annoyed, I scanned for another station, but the dial was filled with nothing but a low, rushing white noise. Then, I heard it. Faintly, at the very edge of the static, was a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a melody. A man whistling. It wasn't a random tune. It was a specific, old-fashioned song I recognized but couldn't place. Something from my grandfather's era. The whistling was perfect, each note clear and precise, carrying a strange, jaunty cheerfulness that was utterly alien to the surrounding emptiness. It lasted for maybe 30 seconds before the static swallowed it again. I wrote it off as a bizarre radio bleed, some distant Mexican station or a trucker's CB playing a prank. An hour later, I saw the lights. Far off in the desert, maybe a mile or two from the road, was a single, bright point of light. It looked like a porch light or a lamp in a window. This was impossible. I was in the middle of the San Simon Valley, a region so barren there weren't even ranches out here. I checked my GPS. Nothing. No towns, no structures, just empty grid coordinates. I slowed down, peering into the gloom. As I passed the point on the road closest to the light, the whistling started again. This time, it wasn't from the radio. It seemed to come from outside the truck, carried on the wind. The same tune, closer now. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I hit the accelerator, pushing my Peterbilt to a speed I wouldn't normally risk on that road. The whistling faded behind me. For the next 50 miles, I saw nothing, and the silence felt like a held breath. The next night, heading back from Albuquerque on a different, but equally remote route through the Gila National Forest, it happened again. The radio died. The whistling began, this time clearer, as if the source were just outside my passenger side window. The tune was the same, but now there were others joining in. A second whistler, then a third, harmonizing in a complex, weaving pattern that was both beautiful and deeply wrong. My hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. I saw more lights, not just one, but a small cluster of them, twinkling in the distance like a mockery of a town. They seemed to move, shifting positions relative to the road. I grabbed my CB mic. Breaker 1-9, this is Midnight Cowboy, anyone copy? I'm on Highway 180, east of Glenwood, seeing some weird lights out in the bush. Anyone else seeing this? The response was immediate, from a grizzled voice I didn't recognize. Driver, you hear the music? Yeah, I hear it. Whistling. What the hell is it? The voice turned grim, urgent. Don't stop. Don't you ever stop for the lights. And for Christ's sake, don't whistle back. The transmission cut into static. The final incident occurred a week later. I was on a deadline, taking a night run through the emptiest part of Nevada, on a long, desolate stretch of US 95 between Tonopah and Fallon. The vast, salt, flat emptiness was playing tricks on my mind. I was fighting sleep when my trailer tires blew. Not one, but two on the same side. It was a catastrophic failure. I managed to wrestle the rig to a shaky stop on the narrow shoulder. I was utterly stranded. No cell service. The nearest town was over 80 miles away. I got on the CB to call for a repair truck, knowing it would be hours before anyone could reach me. As I finished the call, the static on the CB began to morph. The whistling returned, but this time it was different. It was close. So close it sounded like it was right outside the cab. My blood ran cold. I killed all the lights in the cab, plunging myself into darkness. I peered out the side window. At first, I saw nothing. Then, my eyes adjusted to the starlight. There were figures standing in the desert, about 100 yards from the road. They were tall and impossibly thin, just darker shades of black against the night. They were standing perfectly still, facing my truck, and from their direction, the whistling came. That same, cheerful, old-fashioned tune, now played by a chorus of dozens. I sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity. The whistling never stopped. It was a loop, repeating the same 20-second melody over and over. Then, one of the figures moved. It began to walk towards the road. Its gait was unnatural, a stiff, stilted walk that covered ground too quickly. The others followed. They didn't run. They just advanced with that same terrifying, deliberate speed. I fumbled for the .38 revolver I kept in my glove box. My heart was hammering against my ribs. They were halfway to the road now. I could make out no details, only their slender, elongated shapes and the fact that they had no discernible faces, just smooth, dark ovals where heads should be. The lead figure reached the edge of the asphalt. It stopped, and the entire chorus of whistling ceased. The silence that followed was heavier and more menacing than the sound had been. It stood there, looking at my truck. Then, it slowly raised one of its long, thin arms and gestured, a single, beckoning wave towards the darkness of the desert from whence it came. It was at that moment I remembered the name of the song. It was the Merry Go Round Broke Down, the old tune used as the theme for the Looney Tunes cartoons. The cheerful, whimsical melody associated with childhood laughter and animated chaos was now a beacon in the void, a siren song from things that had no business in this world. I didn't wait for them to get closer. I slammed the key in the ignition, said a prayer to any god that would listen, and fired up the tractor. I drove on those two blown tires, the rim screeching and throwing sparks, the trailer fishtailing wildly behind me. I didn't look back. I drove for 20 miles like that, until the metal rims were ground down to nubs and the cab smelled of burning rubber and fear. I never went back to that life. I quit trucking a month later. The ending is not that I escaped. The ending is the knowledge. Those empty spaces on the map aren't empty. They're inhabited. And on quiet, dark nights, when the wind is just right, they stand at the edge of the light, waiting for someone to break down. waiting for someone to stop. They don't want to hurt you. I think it's something worse. I think they just want someone new to join the chorus. And sometimes, late at night, when my house is too quiet, I think I can still hear it. The faint, ghostly echo of a cheerful tune, whistling from a place that doesn't exist. My name is Ariana. I was a 28-year-old investigative journalist based in Seattle, Washington, working for a small online publication that specialized in debunking internet mysteries and local folklore. It was through this work that I first encountered the whispers of the left-right game. The rules were deceptively simple, passed down through obscure forums and encrypted message boards. You must procure a specific vintage vehicle. A 1972 Plymouth Fury was most often cited, and begin your journey at a particular, unmarked crossroads just outside of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. From that point, you were to drive. At every intersection, every fork, every conceivable point where a choice could be made, you must turn left, then right, then left again. You could never turn around. You could never deviate from the sequence. The promise was that if you followed the rules perfectly, the road would eventually lead you to a place outside of consensus reality, a land of wonders and secrets. The penalty for breaking the rules was never stated, only implied. I treated it as a story, a modern-day digital myth. I was a skeptic, but the sheer volume of first-hand accounts, fragmented and frantic, piqued my professional curiosity. With a grant from my editor, I tracked down and purchased a rust bucket 1972 Fury from a junkyard in Tacoma, had it meticulously restored for the journey, and installed a high-end, satellite-linked recording system. I was not going in alone. I assembled a team: Rob, my sound engineer, and a hardened realist, Chloe, a PhD candidate in folklore and linguistics, and Mark, a survivalist and former Marine, hired as our security. We began on a crisp, cloudless morning in October. The starting point was a dusty, forgotten junction of two dirt tracks 20 miles north of Truth or Consequences, marked only by a single, splintered wooden post. I turned on the recorder. Left-right game, log entry 1. October 14th. The team is commencing the sequence. I took a deep breath, gripped the wheel of the Fury, and turned left. The first few hours were unnervingly normal. We drove through arid scrubland, making our prescribed turns onto progressively smaller and more neglected roads. The landscape began to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The colors seemed muted, the light diffuse, as if we were driving under a perpetual, overcast sky even though the sun was visible. The GPS began to glitch, showing our location drifting miles off our actual, physically observable path. Our satellite phones still worked, but the world outside no longer matched the maps. We encountered our first anomaly near dusk. We came upon a small, silent town that wasn't on any map. The sign at its entrance read, Glen Echo. The houses were Victorian era, perfectly preserved but utterly empty. There were no people, no animals, no sounds of insects or wind. In the center of the town was a square, and in the square, a single, ancient oak tree. Hanging from every branch were hundreds of pairs of sunglasses, swaying gently though there was no breeze. As we drove through, following our left-right sequence, we saw that every window in every house had its blinds drawn, and behind the slats, we could just make out the faint, dark shapes of figures standing perfectly still, watching us pass. Chloe documented everything, her voice a whisper of academic fascination mixed with growing dread. Rob checked and re-checked his equipment, assuring us the signals were still going out. Mark sat in stoic silence, his hand never far from the rifle at his feet. Days blurred together. The road became our entire universe. We passed through a forest where the trees were made of a black, obsidian-like glass that chimed softly when the wind blew. We drove along a coastline of a black, viscous sea that reflected no light, where beached, Leviathan, like creatures of impossible biology, lay rotting on the shore. We navigated a canyon where the rock formations seemed to rearrange themselves in our peripheral vision. We strictly adhered to the sequence. Left, right, left. The first break in the rules was accidental. We came to a T-junction. The left turn was blocked by a massive, fallen tree. To go right would break the sequence. After a heated debate, Mark got out to see if the tree could be moved. It was then we saw the hitchhiker. A woman in a tattered 1950s style dress stood by the side of the road, her thumb out. Her face was pale and waxy, and she smiled a fixed, pleasant smile. On the ground next to her was a small, leather suitcase. Against Mark's vehement objections, Chloe insisted we pick her up.
"She's part of the folklore. She's a source,"
she argued. The rules said nothing about passengers. The woman got in the back seat. She said her name was Alice. She smelled of old perfume and dust. She asked where we were going. When we explained the game, her smile never faltered. "You're on the path," she said, "but the path has many branches. You must be careful of the man with the silver tongue. He offers shortcuts, but they all lead down." She rode with us for several hours, through a landscape that had become a flat, gray plain under a starless sky. Then, she asked to be let out at a crossroads that hadn't been there a moment before. As she got out, she turned to me. "Don't listen to the whistling," she said, "and never, ever leave the road." She then walked away from the fury, not down either path, but directly into the featureless gray, until she was swallowed by the void. We sat in stunned silence. When we looked back at the seat where she had been sitting, the small, leather suitcase remained. We never opened it. The man with the silver tongue found us a day later. He was standing next to a pristine, modern gas station that looked utterly out of place. He was dressed in a sharp, silver, gray suit and spoke with a voice that was smooth and hypnotic. He offered us a trade. He said the road ahead was long and fraught with perils that the left-right sequence could not avoid. He offered us a map, a direct route to the ending place. In exchange for the suitcase, the temptation was immense. We were exhausted, mentally fractured. But I remembered Alice's warning. I refused. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, ancient malice. "You will regret your adherence to the rules," he hissed. "The road does not like to be predictable." As we drove away, following a right turn, I looked in the rearview mirror. The gas station and the man were gone. In their place was a gaping, bottomless chasm. The final descent began when we heard the whistling. It was the same cheerful, old-fashioned tune from the Whistler's story, echoing across a desolate canyon we were navigating. It seemed to come from all around us. Mark, sleep-deprived and on edge, rolled down his window and screamed into the darkness for it to stop. The moment he broke the silence, the whistling ceased. And then the things emerged from the canyon walls. They were the tall, slender figures, their forms coalescing from the shadows themselves. They did not beckon. They began to run after the car, their movements a terrifying, disjointed lope that somehow kept pace with our accelerating vehicle. Panic erupted. Rob was sobbing, fumbling with his equipment. Chloe was reciting protective charms from a dozen different cultures. Mark was firing his rifle out the window, the reports deafening in the confined space. I just drove, my knuckles white on the wheel, making left and right turns on a road that was now little more than a crumbling ledge over an abyss. We broke the second rule. In our terror, trying to evade the creatures that were now scratching at the metal of the car, I took a turn too widely. The Fury's back right tire slipped off the edge of the road. The rule was never to leave the road. The moment the tire left the asphalt, everything changed. The world outside the windshield dissolved into a screaming, chaotic vortex of Euclidean geometry, and blinding light. The sound was a physical force, shattering the windows and rupturing our eardrums. I was thrown from the car. I remember the sensation of falling, not down, but in every direction at once. I remember seeing the fury, torn into its constituent atoms, and my friends, their bodies unraveling into streams of color and data. I remember the suitcase flying open, and what poured out was not an object, but a silence so absolute it consumed the chaos around it. I don't know how I made it back. I woke up in a hospital in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I was found wandering in the desert, severely dehydrated and suffering from profound psychological trauma. I was the only one. Rob, Chloe, and Mark were never found. The official report stated I was the victim of a kidnapping and managed to escape my captors. My editor killed the story, citing a lack of evidence and my own reliable mental state. The ending is not that I survived. The ending is the knowledge that I carry. The left-right game is not a game. It is a ritual, a dangerous, precise ritual that navigates the fragile membranes between worlds. I broke the rules and I was spat back out, but I am not unchanged. My senses are now attuned to the fragility of our reality. Sometimes, on a quiet street in Seattle, I'll see a crossroads that looks a little too perfect, a little too empty. And sometimes, if I listen too closely, I can still hear the faint, distant echo of a cheerful tune being whistled, a siren song from a road I should never have taken. A reminder that the path is still there, waiting for the next foolish traveler to make the first turn. The true horror is that the game is still being played, and I am now forever a piece on its board, waiting for my next move to be called.